As the plane's manufacturer, Boeing has an internationally agreed obligation to investigate the crash to make sure all other 747s are airworthy. However, because this flight, Japan 123, was a domestic flight, the international rules did not apply in 1985. Therefore, we did not have an automatic right to go. We had to request permission to travel and to work with the Japanese. Whilst the Americans wait for police permission to access the crash site, Japanese air accident investigators share with them JAL 123's cockpit voice recordings. We could hear explosion on the voice recorder. In fact, there were two loud explosions, one right after the other. Survivors confirmed there was an explosion at the back of the plane, leading investigators to a chilling conclusion. Worldwide in the 1980s, there had been several terrorist acts, hijackings and bombings of airplanes. So when this accident occurred, it gave us a strong suspicion that it was an act of terrorism. We were very highly suspicious that this was a bomb. Further evidence of a possible bomb detonation comes to light in Sagami Bay, 153 kilometers south of the crash site. Japanese sailors discover a large piece of the plane. One of the early things we were shown was the vertical fin, or the tail of the airplane, which had come off over water south of Tokyo, right under the flight path of the airplane. And it indicated that the airplane had had a catastrophic problem well before they ever got to the accident site. A photograph taken during the last minutes of JAL 123's flight confirms investigators' fears. It clearly shows the tail fin is missing. It was, very clear that something unusual had happened. And again, this added to our conjecture that this could have been a bomb. 5 days after their arrival, the American investigation team is granted permission by the Japanese police to access the crash site. Makeshift helipads mean helicopters can now land on the remote mountain ridge of Mount Osaka, north of Mount Fuji. It was chaotic at the time. Helicopters coming and going and coming and going continuously. The investigators begin searching amongst the wreckage for JAL 123's major structural components. One of the things you do as an investigator is you first look for what we call the four corners of the airplane. Where's the nose? Where are the wingtips? Where's the tail? A few meters down the ridge, they find remains of the aft pressure bulkhead, or APB. This circular structure is made of a series of overlapping metal plates riveted together. Sitting between the cabin and tail section, it's designed to stop pressurized cabin air escaping through the back of the aircraft. When we first saw the bulkhead, it was, of course, torn up and badly damaged into many pieces, 6 or 8 or 10 major ones and some little ones. And the pieces were kind of triangular shaped. They ran from the center of the bulkhead out to the edge, something like a chunk of an umbrella. The investigators studied the APB for the telltale signs of bomb damage. A bomb leaves very distinctive evidence on the metal when it explodes. It has so much energy. It's more energy than you can generate in an actual aircraft crash. But most of the bulkhead wreckage displays damage consistent with a high-speed impact. One of the general observations when metal is ripped apart, it'll leave a distinctive, what I call sawtooth shape of a fracture, and it's just ripped apart. We saw evidence of that in the aft part of the aircraft and in most of the aft pressure bulkhead debris. It certainly wasn't caused by a bomb. Looking closer, they discover some unusual damage. There was one piece of the bulkhead that showed curious characteristics different than the rest of the wreckage from the bulkhead. In one area, two pieces had separated in a very straight line, as opposed to the rest of the bulkhead, which had been torn and ripped in overload. It just separated or failed differently, and I wanted to know why. The team wanted to examine the bulkhead section in their lab, but the police refused permission, as their investigation to establish whether a criminal act is responsible for the crash is still ongoing. Because in Japan, the criminal investigation takes precedence over a safety investigation, this caused a difficulty for the safety team to gain access to the accident site, to gain access to other data, including the wreckage that fell off the airplane. It complicated and delayed some of the safety investigation because the criminal investigators were in charge. The team invented an ingenious way around the problem. Boeing came up with a procedure to take replicas of the fracture surfaces, essentially a tape, like adhesive tape, that they would put on the fracture surface. It would not damage the fracture surface. It would take a mirror image of a replica of the fracture, and then that could be examined in a laboratory. The investigators examined tape imprints and field sketches taken from the bulkhead section, displaying the unusual damage. It appears one bulkhead plate is sheared off along the line of rivets, joining it to its neighbor. This metal had torn through these holes. I thought I had detected fatigue, and what we were seeing on the bulkhead was our eureka moment. It was the golden bullet. Having detected the telltale signs of metal fatigue, the investigators now need to know what caused it. They must also find out whether this is an isolated incident or a problem that could ground over 600 747s in service at the time. The investigators pore over the plane's history. In it, they discover that the plane had once been involved in an unusual accident. They learned that in 1978, at Osaka Airport, the plane's pilot landed with the nose too high. The tail struck the ground and scraped along the runway. The aft pressure bulkhead was damaged and needed repairing. It had been repaired 7 years earlier, and it became very, very critical to the investigation, very interesting to us. Discovering the fact that the